Our first speaker is Dr. Ruby Chau, who's sitting here in the front in the yellow sweater. Dr. Ruby Chau is an associate professor in public and social policy at the School of Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Nottingham. Before this, she was a Marie Curie Research Fellow and a lecturer at the University of Sheffield. Currently, she's the co-editor of the international journal Social Policy and Society. Ruby's originally from Hong Kong, but has lived in the UK for 30 years. Her main research interests are women and welfare, family policies, East Asian welfare systems, and cultural sensitivities in health and social care. She has conducted empirical research in 9 Asian and European countries, including China, South Korea, Germany, Hungary, and the UK. Her secondary research covers most counties in the OECD and the East Asian region. She was a visiting scholar to the renowned think tanks such as the Korean Labor Institute in South Korea and the Center for European Public Policies in Belgium, and universities in China, including the Yat-sen University and Peking University. You know what? You must be tired. Wow, and I'm looking at this big smile you're wearing and the energy you bring. Whew, you have walked it and talked it. Over the years, she has played an active role in the local community. She was a project consultant of the Age Better in Sheffield program, which successfully applied for membership of the World Health Organization Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities and Communities for the city of Sheffield. Her current projects include an international writing project for scholars from South Asia and a book project around some themes of childcare gaps in non-Western countries. So, Ruby is here to talk to us today about policy changes and the family's capacity in dealing with changing needs, insights from the Chinese government's recent policies on increasing the fertility rate and reducing homework, something every child loves. So, Dr. Chau, the audience is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Thank you very much for having me here. This is my absolute honor to speak at this conference. And thanks to Dr. Simon for the very kind introduction. And before I start, I would like to join Dr. Simon in, thanking the organizing team to put together this wonderful event. So I have been enjoying it very much myself so far. And thank you for looking after me. And I suppose other delegates will feel the same, just like me. So as said by Dr. Simon, so I'm Ruby Chau. I currently work at the University of Nottingham. So my research is very much about policy on women and family in East Asia and Europe. So I've been traveling a lot and feeling tired all the time because when I was American Research Fellow, so I traveled to 7 countries, some in East Asia and some in Europe, just to study, the social investment perspective and also the family reconciliation policy in different countries. And the reason for me to have so many different countries, because in the current literature about family policy or family study, quite often the literature is dominated by Western experience. Yeah, so as a person from East Asia with a non-Western cultural heritage, so I very much like to see how the different cultural perspective can, contribute or bring something new or something different to the existing debate of this whole topic. So that's why it's very tiring, to be honest, but I think it's worth it. Okay, so I'm very new to the ICCFR, so this is my first time to join any of the activities, so I didn't know that, so the organization has 70 years of history already, so I'm really honored to be here to share the learning and then the ideas with everybody else. So I look forward very much to this following 2 days so that we can exchange ideas and learn from each other more. I learn from you. From people from different academic or professional background or from different countries. So I look forward to that very much. So today I have a very long topic, I have to say, but actually I have cut it down to half of it only, because when I was preparing for this presentation, I think it's just too much to cover two policy areas. So instead of talking about the fertility policy and also the homework policy, so I'll focus more on the homework policies. But if we have the opportunity or if we have the time to talk about the fertility policy as well, so I'll be very, very willing to share what I know about the latest development in the fertility policy in China as well. Okay, so the theme of this conference is the family offer a lifetime foundation to build resilience and elasticity. So this is a very important and timely topic. So as we all know, and also like Dr. Simon has just said, so the last few years has been very challenging for couples and for family. And so couples and family in modern days, so they face demands and challenges from all sides, basically. So the pandemic is just one of the critical period that, bring challenges to both families and individuals and couples. So in both peace and in both time of peace and turbulence, so government intervention play a key role in supporting family and individuals in mitigating their negative life experience, preparing them to face different demands, and building up their capacity to handle challenges in the future. So this is very much my research is about. My research is about policy on helping families and individuals. So borrowing the terminology of social investment concept, which is widely used in East Asia and EU as a policy paradigm, so these functions are referred to as buffer, flow, and stock. So this means that government policy can provide a buffer zone when the life of individuals and family is not as smooth as expected. For example, some government may provide an employment benefit to those whose employment has been interrupted. Government policy can also support family and individuals to flow or transit from one phase to another in their life courses. For instance, government may provide parental training for people who are going to become parents very soon. Finally, government policy can also help individuals and families to build up stock or asset for future use. One example is the housing purchasing schemes in many countries that help the family to build up financial asset for the future development. So by performing these three functions, buffer, flow, and stock, government policy are important to build and maintain families and individuals' resilience and elasticity in face of adversity and challenges. However, government policy do not always bring positive results, or at least not for everybody. Some government policy may benefit some groups more than the others. On some occasions, policy can create new problems or worsen social problems such as social inequalities. For instance, government policy that rely heavily on occupational welfare to meet people's needs may put people outside the job market into a more disadvantaged position and enlarge the income and welfare gap. So in the following, I will introduce the background and content of the double reduction policy and analyze how it could affect the resilience of families and individuals in China. So double reduction policy refers to Chinese government's recent attempt to reduce academic burden of students and also to suppress the private tuition industry. This kind of policy may be a bit intriguing to an international audience or a UK audience like the one here. How on earth the government want to know how much homework students do, okay, or whether they go to a private tuition class or not. But if you can imagine that in China, it has a population of 1.4 billion people, okay, so every little tiny trivial matter can grow up to be a massive problem. So, for example, in 2022, the number of primary and junior high school students in China was close to 160 million, more than double of the UK population. And so how they are educated is related to their families' well-being and the development of future generation of citizens and workers. In fact, students' heavy academic workload has been a central concern of the Chinese government for decades. So there has been various attempts to try to reduce the homework for students in the almost every decade since the 1950s, but very few of these result in an effective solution. I think we all know that the Chinese education system is heavily exam-oriented. So there are currently two major public exams in school education in China. So one is the senior high school entrance exam. In Chinese is 中考. So this takes place in the third year of the junior high school and also the last year of the compulsory education in China. And then the other one is the university entrance exam. In Chinese is called 高考. This exam largely determines whether students can move on to the next stage of education and which institutions that they are going to further their study. So similar to the UK, whether one has university education and which university to attend could have far-reaching effect on the person's future career. So in China, such competition is particularly keen. In 2022, over 33 million students complete the compulsory education, but only less than half of them, 14.5 million, were enrolled to senior high school. In the same year, about 12 million students finished the senior high school education, but only about one-third, 4.3 million, were admitted to university undergraduate courses. The strong emphasis on examination can be traced back to the long history of the imperial exam. In Chinese, it is called Ju, which was introduced in the 6th century in the Sui dynasty. Through the success in the exam, the candidates can enter the civil service and become government officials. It provides a life-changing opportunity for those from humble backgrounds. So when I was young, instead of hearing stories about princes and princesses, I heard about a lot of folk stories about how poor young men spent years studying, preparing for the imperial exam, and eventually succeed and return to their hometown with great glory. So the exam was also very important to rich people because intellectuals were given a very superior social position in traditional Chinese society. So, the social ranking in the society is like that. So intellectuals, farmers, craftsmen, and businessmen. So businessmen were the most inferior because they were not directly involved in the production activities. So to foster a child to become an intellectual and get a job in the imperial government is very important to rich families as well. So that is the major way for them to advance their social status and establish a link with the official. So if they cannot get a son to succeed in the exam, so what they would do is to ask a successful candidate to marry their daughter. So that is another way to do it, okay? So in a lot of these folk stories, so instead of having this successful young man to return to their village to marry or to continue the happy life with their wife or their first love, so this story always ends up with a village girl, usually the wife or the first love, have a broken heart. So the story seldom finishes with a couple living happily ever after. And the moral that I took from this story is that don't marry a man or somebody who can be very smart. Okay, so if you think that your partner is not so smart, that's fine. Stay, let him or her to stay, just like that. Okay, so this explains why Chinese families have this tradition to put a lot of investment into their children's education. Similar to some parents in the UK, so parents in China are willing to pay high housing costs to move to the city or the catchment areas of good schools. Additionally, many parents are prepared to pay for off-campus private tuition to help their children to prepare for the two important examinations I've just mentioned. So OECD figures in 2020 show that 70% of students in Beijing, Shanghai, Jiangsu, and Guangzhou, four very important cities in China, took supplementary tuition compared to the OECD average of 46%. The so-called shadow education industry in China was valued at 490 billion yuan in 2017, so which is roughly equivalent to 56 billion pounds. With an average tuition fee of around 5,600 yuan per student per year, that is about 640 pounds. Academic achievement became even more important under the one-child policy, which was introduced in the early 1980s. So with only one child for a married couple or two in some exceptional cases, the one child became the only hope for the family to bring success and pride to the whole family. So the traditional hope of sons growing up to become dragons and daughters growing up to become phoenixes continued to prevail. According to the China Education Tracking Survey, over 95% of parents with children in compulsory education, they want to have their offspring to study bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. So to meet parents' expectations, school often assign extensive homework and require extra courses. For instance, the average number of hours spent on homework among school students was 2.82 hours a day in 2017, almost triple the global average. The 2015 PISA, that is the Performance of International Student Assessment, a very important global assessment program, results indicate that students from 4 Chinese locations, Beijing, Shanghai, Jiangsu, and Guangzhou, spend more than 30 hours per week on regular curriculum, which is higher than the OECD average for students across all countries. So this high expectation in a seriously competitive environment come with very high social costs. Some children's mental well-being suffers. A report of the Institute of Psychology of the Chinese Academy of Sciences in 2020 showed that only 46.4% of Chinese adolescents slept for 8 hours or more on school nights. So that means more than half of these children, they have less than 8 hours sleep per night during the term time. My son slept for about 12 hours, if he can. Yeah. So it must be very hard life in China. And then another study showed that 41.8% of the 15,000 student respondents had mental health problems. So among them, about 60% were related to academic stress. And then a report also shows that the prevalence of non-suicidal self-harm in children and adolescents worldwide was about 20%. But in China, the percentage among middle school students was 27.4%. So that is a much higher proportion. So not only the children suffer, but also their parents, we can imagine that. So a study in 2018 concerned the level of parental anxiety among middle-aged families showed in 3 provincial cities that almost 90% of the respondents who are parents were anxious about the children's education. So they can be anxious about the children's school selection, children's learning achievement, children's learning attitude, children's future development, and parent-child interaction. Additionally, the unequal access to off-campus tuition could worsen social inequalities. A comparative study conducted by Young in 2020 identified a correlation between the level of income inequality and the participation rate in off-campus private tuition among students who took part in the 2015 PISA. The increasing popularity of off-campus private tuition has not only reinforced inequality in education, but also strengthened the culture of competitiveness. And subsequently, the institutionalization and social acceptance of the necessity of off-campus private tuition. As pointed out by Ma and Zhang, private tuition is no longer regarded as remedial or supplementary to school education, but a necessary measure to advance academic performance and boost exam results for the children. To rectify the above problems, the Chinese government introduced a double reduction policy in 2021. In the major document called Opinion on Further Reducing the Burden of Students' Homework and Off-Campus Training in Compulsory Education, the government lists 3 policy aims. So the first one is to manage the amount of homework of students. The second one, to regulate the off-campus tutoring business. And the third one, to improve the relationship between students, parents, and teachers. So there are some policy suggestions, so I just list a few of them. First, no new subject-based off-campus training institution for compulsory education students will be approved, and existing institutions will not necessarily be registered as non-profit entities. Disciplinary training institutions are prohibited from raising funds through listing on the stock market or engaging in capitalization operations. And then students in different grades, so there is a limit of time for them to do their homework. So for grade 1 and 2 in primary school, so there shouldn't be any written homework. And then for children in grade 3 to 6, so the average time to complete written homework should not exceed 60 minutes. And then for students in junior high school, so the average time to complete written assignments should not exceed 90 minutes. Probably these are still much higher than what we experience in different countries. And then also schools must use off-campus service time to guide students in completing their homework, but cannot use the time to teach new lessons. In addition to homework, schools are required to provide extra study space for students who need it and organize various activities that promote science, culture, sports, arts, labor, reading, interest groups, and club activities. And also, according to the document, it's crucial to define and clarify the roles of and responsibility of both the parents and the school. This can be achieved by fostering open communication and exploring innovative approaches to collaboration, ultimately leading to the development of a strong and supportive community dedicated to educating people. So the impact of this new double reduction policy is multifold. So first of all, it significantly limits the ability of profit-driven off-campus training institutions to provide services to parents and children. So Gore's research, for instance, revealed that the response to the introduction of the double reduction policy, the stock prices of companies such as the New Oriental, TAL, and Gaotou have fallen more than 50%, leading to a significant layoff. So with New Oriental alone having to fire almost 1 million people. Secondly, there has been a reduction of student workload in school. According to the national survey report by the China Institute of Education and Social Development, over 88% of teachers have taken measures to reduce homework for the students. And this also leads to a significant decrease in the amount of homework assigned to students. So over 75% of students receive less homework than the previous semester, and 83.5% of students being able to complete most of their written homework at school. The policy was also welcomed by some parents, so as reported by Kai and Hu in their qualitative study. So one parent said, "We trust school teachers' tutoring. We hope children can complete the homework in school." And then other parents said that, "Oh, I'm glad to see that the state introduced this policy. In the past, we were so afraid that the children will fall behind academically. So now we don't have to send them to training institutions, and that reduces our family expenditure to a great deal." Finally, the implementation of the double reduction policy has encouraged a more diverse and less exam-oriented curriculum. For example, a study conducted in Beijing in 2022 showed that 89% of student respondents were satisfied with the after-school services, which include a range of homework support and also time for reading, sports, labor, and social practice. However, not all reviews on the double reduction policy show the same positive results. For example, the pressure on teachers have become a big concern. A study in the Jiangsu province showed that teachers' working hours have been increased by 1.5 hours per day. So most teachers spend at least 10 hours in school every day. And it's important to notice that many teachers are parents themselves, so they may not have enough time to look after their own children under the increased workload. And in the long term, it is easy for them to experience occupational fatigue and burnout. And not all parents feel fully reassured by the policy either. A survey conducted by the Central Propaganda Department of China and Social Survey Center of the China Youth Daily in 2021 showed that 87% of the over 500,000 parent respondents in the study felt anxious after the introduction of the new policy. Among them, 73% said that they have difficulty tutoring their children, and over half worry about their children will be academically behind if they would not be able to give them private tutoring. And some parents felt that their children would be disadvantaged because of the regional disparity in educational resources. and 35% were concerned about the quality of the after-school services, as some of these services were co-delivered by teachers, parents, and volunteers, not all by the teaching staff with professional training. And in response to the change in policy, the private tuition market also makes some significant changes. So some institutions rebrand their service as high-end home economic services. So they will do cleaning services for you, of course, but also home tuition. And then some people also offer the service of live-in teachers, and that could cost up to 50,000 yuan per month, which is about 6,000 pounds. And then another study also showed that there was an increase in the number of searches in Taobao, which is a Chinese online shopping platform, just like Amazon, for services and products such as home education, learning tablets, and one-to-one tuition. So the demand for one-to-one tutoring has also increased. The hourly rate ranged from 700 to 1,000 yuan, about 80 to 115 pounds per hour. So given that the per capita income in urban household of just 50,000 yuan a year, and rural household just over 20,000 yuan a year. So this is a massive number for people who do not have the financial resources. So these findings suggest that parents who have the financial resources are ready to pay more to the private market to enhance their children's academic performance. Parents with more financial constraint may not be able to get the additional educational services from the market as before. This may increase their anxiety level and concern about whether their children will be further disadvantaged. Some analysts argue that parents' continuous anxiety is related to the importance of the public examination in determining students' access to higher education and future career prospects. Despite the change in compulsory education brought by the double reduction policy, there is little corresponding reform in the public examination system. The gap between the supply and demand of higher education remain largely unchanged. The emphasis on competitiveness continues. Gore pointed out that the major problem lies in the public exam is the standardization of the assessment criteria. The enrollment of higher education is by and large based on the score of the exam only. To secure high scores, students are expected to repeatedly practice on exam questions and engage heavily in academic study. Referring to the free social investment concept that we have mentioned earlier at the beginning of the paper, namely buffer, flow, and stock, it is not difficult to notice the limitation of the new double reduction policies in strengthening Chinese families and individuals' resilience to challenges posed by the highly competitive education system. The policy may have some immediate buffer effects on students by reducing the amount of homework, and on parents by preventing them to pay a lot to the private tuition industry. However, it does not seem to be able to keep students and parents' anxiety at bay because some may feel being further disadvantaged because of the lack of financial resources to take up the high-end educational services the market offer under the new policy. The policy doesn't seem to have a strong effect on flow either. In terms of students' transition from compulsory education to higher education, the public examination system remains similar. There's no significant increase in the resources in higher education to meet the continuously strong demand. Students from less well-off backgrounds may find the transition even more difficult because they don't have the access or very limited access to private educational services as their classmate or coursemate from better off family background. And regarding the stock, not all families' capacity will be enhanced under the new policy. To maximize the opportunity of getting good exam results, family may have to pay a higher cost to obtain the tuition services from the private market. Some may become even more keen to get an address in the catchment areas of schools with good exam results. Subsequently, their financial capacity may be undermined. Additionally, parents are expected to spend more time on tutoring and joining school activities with their children. To reduce the workload of the teachers, some schools may expect parents to volunteer in after-school activities. This may also reduce the parents' time capacity in raising financial resources for the family or achieving a good work-life balance for themselves. In summary, the double reduction policy has positive and negative impact on Chinese families and individuals. It serves as a very good example of the potential of the government policies in either enhancing or undermining the resilience of families and individuals in facing challenges posed by traditional culture, competition in the economy, and government policy themselves. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you for listening, and any question and feedback are very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks very, very much. There's a lot of stuff in that presentation I know I've never thought about, let alone learned about, and I'm imagining the same is true for the audience. So it's really quite eye-opening. What we're going to do is open up for questions and answers. And so I would like to invite questions and answers from you.
Dr. Chau, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. I'm
you.
interested in the effect of COVID on children's education in the longer term. In England and Wales, for example, we've seen at least two impacts. One is that in the private sector of education and some of the state sector, the education continued very well during COVID, with the teachers being very, very diligent and the children doing a lot of their homework. Careful what I'll say, but in some of the schools, perhaps some of the schools in the poorer areas, the children didn't have that advantage, and we now fear that we'll have perhaps a generation of an accentuated gap in the educational standards. And secondly, we had children who simply weren't at school and they got used to absenteeism, truancism. We have a concept of ghost children. We have a lot of children now, sadly, no longer going back to school on a long-term basis, a second long-term trend. China had a far greater lockdown policy than almost any other country, and I imagine, therefore, there were huge consequences on their education and going forward over the next couple of decades. Could you share what you know that we obviously don't know because it's a relatively closed country?
Okay, thank you. So actually, I must say that I'm not originally from China. So I've been in the UK for 30 years, okay? And then actually my son did his A-level during COVID. So all the problems that you've mentioned, I can see that in my son. But he's okay now, he's at university now. And then in China, I think I don't have any, reference material about COVID and its impact on children's education. But I believe because in China, as you say, they have very strict quarantine policy. And it's not just like the UK, we have sort of the overall quarantine, but they also have a lot of local quarantine as well. So it's very difficult to estimate, the actual effect, because China is such a huge country. And then there are also a lot of local lockdown. And then when we say we have lockdown in the UK, so maybe we just stay at home. But when we talk about lockdown in China, so these people, they may be transported to some facilities, outside their family. Not to say, having like a regular life, but so they may be completely isolated, because of the positive results from the COVID. So it's very difficult to estimate how big the impact is on children's education. And to be honest, it will be also very difficult to find the information because of the, the lack of, speech, freedom of speech in China. Yeah, so I'm sorry I don't have the answer for your question.
Thank you. I'll come here so that... thank you for your presentation. I resonated so much with it because we had similar... I'll come that side, it's easier. Resonated so much with it because this is what we faced in India too. Particularly with homework and with schoolwork and with, I'm talking about working parents. And particularly because where parents were working, in most cases, educated parents were working, at least they had some resources to send their children to home tuitions or to tuitions outside. We have a big coaching factory. And what I mean by the coaching factory is this is a city which has only tuition centers that trains people for competitive exams, particularly for professional exams, which is medical entrance or engineering entrance. So we have a high rate of suicides in this age group of children because of that forced, the pressure on students to study and to get into a professional degree. And parents, I literally sell their property and invest on the child's preparation for the entrance exam. Now so therefore families literally revolve all their hopes and dreams around one person. And it means, selling property, selling land, selling what they have, and the investment that parents make. So pretty much like what we would see. So we are really cousins, in many ways. So when that happens and children don't get what they need, particularly the ticket to the entrance exam or the ticket to the medical school or to the engineering school, what do? They let their parents down. You see the pressure, it's like one vicious cycle. And because parents feel let down and children feel they can't face their parents or parents can't face society, then, there's a rampant suicide. So we have this, this place in Rajasthan, in the western part of India, that manufactures coaching classes for students, and that is a hub of suicide, particularly for students. Having said that, the government has taken a very strict and stern policy about regulating these coaching factories, and that has come down now, and thankfully so. Also, in response to your question about COVID, the digital divide that we saw in India during COVID was tremendous. Life stood still for children, for some children who didn't have access to devices, whether it was a laptop or whether it was a smartphone. And we've had instances of young children, because they didn't have access to a smartphone, their mother was a domestic worker who could barely make ends meet and didn't have money because some families decided not to pay the mother during the lockdown period. So she just attempted suicide. Whether it's one or whether it's 10,001, loss is a loss, and it's a serious wake-up call for us to say, what are we doing to our children? So when we say that there's a digital divide, what happened was this stagnancy for these children. They just didn't move from one class to the other. And not only not move from one class to the other, so in India we have this free and compulsory education, so children are just promoted to the next class. But are they ready to learn and ready with their learning skills? No. So, we see that gap that is occurring just now. And when they have to come back to school, the same that you said, our children are not willing to come back to school. Another phenomenon that we saw, and I don't know how it is in other parts of the country, of the world, children got married at a very young age. We can't feed one more mouth in our family, so get the child married. And these are realities that we are facing. And this is one of and these realities actually are very challenging because we don't know what to say or do. Or in some of our hands are tied. We don't see a way out. While the reality is so harsh, there's little that we can do. Thank you. I just wanted to share because I resonated so much with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So actually, I would like to respond to that comment. So thank you very much. I'm very interested in the situation in India because, India, so very recently, the news said that the population in India may overtake China very soon. Have already? Oh, okay. Yeah, so with two very populated countries, so there are, and then also, a lot of tradition and history, so a lot of things are very similar. But I want to add to what I've just said here is because, so the double reduction policy actually is just part of a very big reform, education reform in compulsory education in China. So actually, around the same time, around 2020 and 21, so the Chinese government have introduced a lot of different education reforms. Say, for example, there's a huge expansion of the vocational training, because I think although China seems to be so far away and such a different country with different tradition and also all sorts of differences between China and other countries, but actually it's facing a lot of problems very similar to what we have in the UK. Say, for example, we don't have enough people with vocational skills because everybody wants to go to university. So, and then we have very low fertility rate and aging population. All those kind of problems are very common in China and also in Western countries as well. So actually, this double reduction process is just part of the whole education reform. So whether, the Chinese government managed to change parents' mind, to send all the children to university or allow some to go into vocational training, or, whether this reduction of homework policy is effective, we don't know. So it's only part of a bigger package. So it will take time to tell whether the Chinese government is, kind of influential enough to make those changes against the traditional culture. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment. It's interesting to me that part of what I was thinking when you were speaking was one of the common concerns you hear in America, and I think in Western Europe, is we're falling behind to India, to China, especially in the STEM subjects, right? And what you were describing was some of the downsides of all of the pressure to achieve and accomplish. So part of what I'm thinking when I listen to the two of you and reflect on your comments is how important it is, I wonder what your thoughts are about this, that there's some balance and moderation between the emphasis on excellence and the emphasis on accomplishment and getting the top score and getting getting into the medical school, and having a focus also on what I like to call personhood, and being a well-rounded young person, a global citizen, if you will, rather than a human being who believes their job is to simply accomplish things and be excellent at things. You had a question. Angela, here, yeah, please.
Yes, so thank you for a very interesting presentation. I am very curious to know if you had to be asked for advice from the Chinese government about equality in education, because I can see that as a running theme in your presentation. What would your advice be?
You mean if the Chinese government asked for my advice? I don't think that will happen in millions of years.
But how?
Yeah.
It's a very, imaginative.
Yeah, thank you. But I want to respond to your question and also what Dr. Simon has mentioned. Because my research is very much about comparative study between different cultures and, especially between the Western and non-Western countries. So actually, a lot of those problems are very common. We are all facing about our, competitiveness in the world economy. We are all facing about we don't have the people with the right skill to promote the economy. We are all facing the problem of, migration and, all those kind of problems. So actually, and then my research in Europe also showed that, I mentioned about social investment, the social investment concept in the EU. So actually, the whole concept, the background to the concept is about how to boost the EU economy to make it more knowledge-based economy in the future. So that's why, the whole social investment paradigm behind that is they drive to seek for further economic growth. So it's very difficult for a country to say, oh, okay, let's relax. Okay, let's relax and let our children enjoy their childhood. Very few countries will do that now because everybody knows that. So they are the future generation of not necessarily citizens, but they are workers. If we don't give them the sufficient training and whatever, then we will have a very poor future for the economy and for the country as well. So this feeling of, everybody is feeling, oh, we are falling behind. Even the US, US is the top power, obviously. Even the US or the Europe, the whole EU feeling that, oh, we are behind. So that's why we need to go, go faster, go ahead of everybody else. Yeah, and then at the same time, China, India, and a lot of, developing economies, so they feel the same. Oh, we have to catch up with the US, with the Europe, and so on and so forth. We have to take over them, at least, in some aspects. So I think it's very difficult for any country, to get themselves out of this global competition. Yeah, no matter it's in terms of the existing economy or the future. So if in a million years' time, the Chinese government asks me for advice, the US government asks me for advice, the British government asks me for advice, I'll say, I don't know. Sorry, you asked the wrong person. Yeah, that's my answer.
May I comment a bit more?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Because, for example, nevertheless, for example, if you look like countries like Finland, for example, where their education system has a level of good practice that can be easily emulated by others because of their PISA results. You mentioned the PISA results, because of the value that is given to teaching and to teachers, and the status that is given to them, because of the way children and the services that exist not only for the children but also for the parents and for women and men, not only, so there is this more egalitarian. I'm very interested, ultimately, the issue of equality is a right to all children, and social mobility is a right to all children. So for me, the greater issue is not only the homework, but to what extent are we reproducing social class, or are we simply repeating, what is going on? So I think that there may be answers. There may be answers also in terms of neuroscience and what is teaching us in terms of the development of the brain and the pre-readiness skills that children have to be able to cope with what they are presented with in class, their language development. So I believe that, yes, there are answers that can be brought forward. And in this respect, I believe that comparative policies could help and inform us to bring this idea of equality forward. And I'm not sure to put it mildly, all countries believe in equality in education.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that at least someone in this room feel more hopeful than me. Yeah, so I think that is very important. And I think this is the beauty of having a audience from different disciplines, because we may see different things, and some may think that something in my field is more hopeful, and somebody else think that so in my field it's not so promising. So I think it's good to have more interdisciplinary discussion. I think that is important. But one thing I want to point out is, so obviously equality is very important. Yeah, in my research is a lot about gender equality. So it's not necessarily just education equality and wage equality and social equality and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we also need to think about, on top of equality, we also need to respect individuals' choices. Yeah, so saying that, so say for example, if I do 3 hours of housework and you do 3 hours of housework, that looks like, that is equal. But if I really love to do housework, I prefer to do 6 hours, and you really hate to do housework, and you prefer not to do anything, then although on the surface, so that is equal, but we are deprived of the opportunity to choose what we like to do. So on top of equality, we also need to think about autonomy, whether people have the capacity, whether they have the training and so on and so forth to do what they want, what they prefer, instead of just, doing the same thing, with the same amount. So that is also another thing that I've learned from my own research, because just equality may not be the best answer for everybody. Yeah, okay, thank you.
I'll add to that as a psychologist, and it's intuitive, but it's true. You use the word autonomy.
Yeah.
Autonomy in the sense of having a sense of personal agency and efficacy,
Yep.
and being able to make choices that suit who you are is one of the keys to a sense of well-being and self-esteem,
Yeah,
which of course then builds happier people, happier families,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Chau, for the very interesting presentation. I had a thought, I have the feeling that this policy is more focused on prevention, preventing financial burden on the families, preventing mental stress for the children, preventing suicide. Are you aware, or do you have any policies that you know of that are focused on promoting mental health, promoting well-being of the students? I mean, something like financing, activities that the children do in their free time. Maybe this would be a more positive kind of direction, or also on top to this policy.
Okay, thank you for your question. So actually, of course there are, because I mean in China, so there are like extracurricular activities, although quite a lot of them is about training as well. I mean, like you know that there are a lot of very famous pianists from China. So it's mainly about, you know, practicing, and then they make perfect and become very successful artists, you know, that is well known. So of course there are a lot of activities, you know, youth and children's center and those kind of things in China. But again, because of the competitiveness, so a lot of those activities are based on assessment. Okay, so no matter what, actually, when my son was little, I took him back to Hong Kong. So at that time, Hong Kong was already handed over back to China. So no matter what you learn, even when you learn badminton, so the coach will tell you that, oh, we have this assessment next week, or we have an assessment, you know, 2 weeks later, and so on and so forth. So everything you learn, even my son is like to build Legos very much. And even for Legos, there are competitions. Who can build the best Lego, and, you know, prizes and what, and so on and so forth, okay? So some children may enjoy that and some may not. But it's interesting for you to ask this question is because, so when I prepare for this presentation, so I've just mentioned about the lack of sleep among young people in China. And then I was thinking, oh, so, okay, so what can the government do to, you know, improve their quality of sleep? And then I actually find that there is a policy on sleeping in China. Yeah, so it was introduced in, I've written down some notes, I think. Yeah, it was introduced in 2021. So the Chinese government actually gives some guidelines on students' sleeping pattern. So for primary school children, they should go to bed by 9:20 in the evening, okay? Middle school children by 10 p.m. Senior high school by 11 in the evening. So that is the government guidelines. So again, whether this can put into practice or not, I don't know. But school start at 8. Yeah, so, and don't forget that China is a very big country, so sometimes children have to spend an hour on traffic. And also, very often, I mean, even when my son was in Hong Kong attending primary school, so there are always early morning activities as well. So if you are prefect or if you are whoever, you know, the school asks you to go back like half an hour before to prepare for, you know, if you are a library assistant, so you have to, you know, take up your post in the library and so on and so forth. So, so there are measures like that. So on the one hand, it sounds good because the government noticed the problem, so they want to give a solution. But at the same time, when we go back to talking about family, so who knows when the child will go to bed? It will be the parents. So the responsibility are put on parents again. So the parents have to follow this guideline and make sure that their children go to bed early. And the parents have to make sure that the children won't go to private tuition. The parents have to make sure that the children finish homework within 60 minutes. So it's always the parents. So I think when I prepare for this presentation and I read the reason, the rationale behind this particular theme of the conference is because we understand that, family take up a lot of responsibility. So, but sometimes governments or, people who involve in policy and practice, they just assume that the family is a bottomless source of resources. Okay, so no matter how much you add on the family, so the family have to do it, no matter they can or cannot. Okay, so that when we talk about family, so basically it's mainly about the couple, the parents, right? So the parents, the middle-aged people are expected to look after the children, look after the older generation, and so they are expected to do all sorts of things, even volunteer in the school. But how do they have all the resources to cope with all these new demands? So it's interesting that on the one hand, we think that the family is sort of the foundation, or the place that can support individual. But at the same time, a lot of policies or current practice are undermining the capacity of the families. Yeah, so families are not bottomless pool of resources. And if we keep asking them to do more, and at the same time taking away the resources they already have, so family could become like an empty shell, and there will be more and more problem coming up from this sort of hollowing out the family, this process.
I'm going to take one more question.
Thank you. I'm so sorry that I did not hear your speech, but I would like to comment on sleeping and on policy. Mm-hmm. The pandemic showed that children internationally, what they liked was sleeping longer. And this is their message. Not that you should go to bed this or that time, but think about the morning hours. And adults say that 8 is okay because we go to work. And this is convenient for adults. And in some cases, in Estonia, where I come from, I'm Dagmar, some schools have changed the school starting hour from 8 to 9. And this is policy that really listens to the children. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and adding to that, another new practice in China is that actually in some provinces, the school have ordered some new furniture. So the reason for them to order the new furniture is they order some chair and desk that could sort of decline into a bed. Okay, so if you like, you can Google search it. So it's a bit like the aeroplane, the seats in the aircraft. So sort of they can let the back of the chair fall down a little bit, so that, and then they will have within the school timetable. So they will have like a half an hour or 1 hour afternoon nap after lunch. Yeah, so it is happening in China. And of course, like referring to your question, so this seems to be very sort of minor, but it can be very, very helpful. And also like, you mentioned that schools start later. Yeah, so all these small things can be very helpful. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chau. Your presentation obviously stimulated a lot of discussion.
Thank you.